Everyone, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Leslie Kirby, and I'm the Vice President of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm delighted to have with us tonight Moshe Werthan, who's a very well-known member of our community, and we've asked him to come here tonight to speak with us a little bit about his personal narrative around Israel. So Moshe, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us how you came to know about Israel and to decide ultimately that you wanted to live there.
I will do so. Okay, when Leslie told me about this evening and suggested that I speak to the community about our experience in Israel, moving to Israel, how we decided to move there, at first I thought, how will I find enough to say, for 20 or 25 minutes? And then I started making notes, and when you start recounting experiences over some 80 years, it begins to fill up the page pretty quickly. So then I filled it up and I had to cut back, but anyway, I will stay within the time. The question is most often asked about our move to Israel, why we did it, how we came to the decision to do it. And people might wonder about it, particularly those who come from Nashville, because of my background, my family's background. My great-grandfather moved to Nashville in 1868 from Germany, and he started business here, and that business continued in Nashville, different parts of Nashville, but ended up in North Nashville. The business went on for a little over 150 years. So you might say we have a pretty strong connection to Nashville, and the thought of moving somewhere else, either another place in the United States or Israel, seems a little unusual. So I grew up at the Vine Street Temple that was on 7th Avenue North, and in the downtown, it's now the Temple. And basically my Jewish education was made up of Bible stories. We virtually learned no Hebrew. The only Hebrew in the Shabbat service was the Kaddish, the Baruch Hu, and the first two lines of the Shema. And basically, that's what I learned. That was the Hebrew I learned. Additionally, my parents, who were leaders in almost every organization you could think of in Nashville, both Jewish and non-Jewish, were also leaders in the only anti-Zionist organization in the United States, the American Council for Judaism, which was strongest in the South. Nashville had a pretty strong chapter, Tulsa, Oklahoma, some places in New Orleans and so forth. So, but Libby and I went to the first, after we got married in 1959, we were invited to go to a meeting. And we went, and everything they talked about was negative. There was nothing that they were in favor of. It was only what they were against. And what were they against? They were against Israel. And why were they against Israel? Because they felt that they owed a strong loyalty to the United States. And if someone was loyal to another country in addition to the United States, people might look at them and say, that they weren't fully American or whatever. And so most of the people that belong to the American Council here were belonged to the Temple, very Reformed Jews. And anyway, but Libby and I went to that one meeting. We never went again. In fact, as we were driving out the driveway, I said, why did anybody want to belong to that? They're just against everything. And mainly, though, it was mostly against Israel. So Libby had a stronger Jewish education than I did, although it was not very strong. At the time of our marriage in August of 1959, from that time until Libby made her first trip in 1969, we had very little connection with Israel and probably could not have found it on a map without help. Libby was invited to go on the first National Women's Division mission because she was going to be chair of the Nashville campaign. And she went, to take notes. She had a notebook and a pen, and she was going to find out everything. And one once she got there, particularly when she went to the Kotel, she had like this awakening and a realization that, you know, what it really meant to be Jewish and what Israel really was. I mean, it just came to her like in a flash, and that trip turned her around and when she came home, she was like a maniac. She, you know, she kept saying to me, you gotta go, you gotta go. And I said, why am I not gonna go? I'm not gonna go. You gotta go right away. Well, it turned out that the Federation had a first men's mission from Nashville the next year. And of course, I was asked to lead the mission. So of course I was gonna go. I mean, even with what Libby said, if you're gonna lead something, you know, you gotta step up. So on that mission, there were 7 or 8 guys. I made some notes because my memory's not so good. Raymond Zimmerman, who now lives in Florida, Steve Ribbon, High Wynn, who's no longer with us, Henry Sender also, Sharon Weinberger also, and Sandy Ginsberg also. So really, I guess Steve and I are the only ones around to tell the tale. So we went in, I think, November of 1970, and we went first to Tel Aviv, and we were walking down this main street in Tel Aviv, and it looked just like a big city, like New York. And we're all walking together and we're saying, what did we come here for? I mean, we could have gone to New York and seen this. And then we went to Jerusalem. So that, you know, as everybody knows who goes on missions, you stop on the way in and you say a blessing, and then you go in. And even then, you know, the city was just, you know, so amazing. But we finally realized what it was all about when one day they took us into the Jewish quarter, and we're walking down through the old city, and we're going down these steps, you know, in narrow steps, and we come around this corner, and there's a cow's head sitting on the ground in front of this store with big brown eyes and just looking right at us. And we said, okay, now we know why we're here. We know what's different. Nashville doesn't have any places with cows' heads sitting there looking at you. So that's when we got the message. Anyway, the big question about moving, and so we first started talking about moving in 1976 after we'd spent 5 weeks there with our son Jeremy, who was 5. We started talking about, you know, would it be possible to ever live there, move there? We made like 4 or 5 trips to Israel between 1969 and the time we moved. It didn't seem really possible because I was so involved in my business, and then Libby started a shop here in Stanford Square, and it just didn't seem, and we had 4 children, and it just didn't seem possible. But the more we talked about it, we thought maybe we could figure it out. And so in 1982, we started getting serious about it, and I spoke to my family, the other people and principals in our company about the idea of doing it. And I thought, they're never going to accept this because it just, you know, they're going to think I'm crazy. So, but once I got that on the table, others started thinking about what they might want to do. And so to them, they had ideas too about how they wanted to go forward. And so they were accepting of it. And we spent the next 7 years planning how we would do this. So here were some of the questions that came up about it. What would be the effect on family members, individually and collectively? Our 4 children, our parents, and close family relations, my brother and sister and their families, Libby's brother and his family. Could we afford to move knowing there that we'd probably not be able to make a living because neither one of us spoke Hebrew? What would be the effect on our community? We were significantly involved in the leadership of many Jewish and non-Jewish organizations. Believe it or not, we thought the community was going to collapse if we left. I mean, how could they survive without us to run everything? So really, we were, I mean, I know that sounds silly, but we really were worried about it. And lo and behold, it survived. So it all worked out. What would be the effect on my family's business? I was an executive in the company. Families, relatively, it was a large business in Nashville, but a relatively small business in today's terms. And Libby had her business in Stanford Square, and what would be the effect on that? The matter of leaving our friends and moving to a place where we didn't know anyone. We didn't know, we had met one family in Israel when we were there in 1975, and we kept in connection, but we really didn't know anyone. Moving to a place where we had no place. We knew no one in Nashville. We knew everyone. Everyone knew us. We were an integral part of the community. And basically, moving to Jerusalem, where we intended to live, we had no community. We didn't know anyone, and no one knew us. And it was a little bit scary, and yet it was also exciting. We're both basically going to be starting our lives over at age 53. Another consideration was that while living in Nashville, we each were involved with many community organizations, both Jewish and non-Jewish. And most of the things we worked on didn't overlap. Federation was probably the only one that we both worked on. You might say that we were so involved in our many pursuits that it was like passing each other in the night. In Israel, on the other hand, we would be together 24/7, which would be a huge change. How would that work out? Would it work out as well as we thought? They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. What does constant togetherness mean? So you can see Libby's over there, so
it worked out.
we had our 62nd anniversary, it's coming up in August, so you can see that it worked out okay. Okay, our youngest son, Jeremy, this, again, more questions. Our youngest son, Jeremy, would be starting college in the fall of the year, in the fall of the next year. Where would he go on vacations? How could we support him when he had problems and we were 6,000 miles away? What about our other 3 children who were out of college but just getting their feet on new ground? How would we be able to support them? And finally, when we told the children in 1982 that we were thinking about making this move, they said, "You have to live your dream." And I'm sure they meant it. That was the going thing in those days, to live your dream. The idea was much more palatable when it was just a dream, but what would it be like when it became a reality? So just on that point, up till the time we moved, everything was going great. We moved, of course, and we rented an apartment in Jerusalem, in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the old city. And so it was a furnished apartment. Our furniture stayed in our apartment here in Nashville. Everything was cool. Then when in the fall, when our apartment was finished, we purchased an apartment in the Baca neighborhood in February of 1990. And when it was finished in November and the moving van came to take the furniture and all our furniture left Nashville, it was a new story. Now, I'm not going to, everybody, hung in there really well, but you could tell there were going to be issues. Okay, so now I want to move into talking about life as New Orleans in Israel, New Orleans from Nashville. In advance of our leaving Nashville, we leased a 3-bedroom apartment in the Jewish quarter, as I see it, for 1 year from a South African family who were going back to South Africa for an extended period. We did leave Nashville on January 1st, 1990, arriving in Israel the next day. We had a plan that we thought was a good one. So Libby, who was responsible for everything and had made all the notes and had all, what we're going to do, how it's going to work, she had her notebook full of what to do and so on and so on. And we're supposed to get to Jerusalem, in the evening of that first night. And we take a taxi to the old city, to the Jewish quarter. Those of you who've been there, it's a big parking lot. It was dark and it started to rain and we had all this luggage and Libby reaches in her bag to get her notebook. Zippo, no notebook. So in the notebook is the name of the man we're supposed to call to come get us up in the parking lot and show us the apartment. Well, fortunately, we remembered his name, but what good was that going to do? Because we didn't have his phone number and they didn't have, there's no email, none of that. So we're standing there trying to figure out what to do. And Jeremy, who was at the time 18, Jeremy said, well, wait a minute, there's a phone over there. I'll go look in the phone book. And so he said, I'll find Chaim Cohen. I said, how many Chaim Cohens do you think they're going to be, in Jerusalem? And how will you know which one? And how can you even read the phone book? I mean, the phone book's all in Hebrew. I looked at it, I couldn't make out any of it. He said, I went to Kiva school. I can read, I can understand Hebrew. Okay, go. So lo and behold, he found Chaim Cohen in the Jewish quarter, called him. Chaim Cohen comes up. I mean, it was like a miracle. So he comes up, we get our bags, we go down to the apartment, everything is great. It's really a nice apartment. He leaves us and we go to bed. Now the next afternoon, the next afternoon we had planned to go on a 2-week trip to Italy to take Jeremy for kind of our last go. So, no, I'm sorry, the next day. So Libby and Jeremy woke up the next morning at about 5:30 and we had this terrace outside the living room and they go out there and they hear the church bells ringing. They hear the Mizun, however you pronounce that, calling the Muslims to prayer in the old city. And right below our apartment was Esha Torah, and there were boys in yeshiva davening Shachari. So here's Shachari, the Muslim Mizun, and the church bells. And Libby turned to Jeremy and said, we're not in Nashville anymore. So we spent the day unpacking and then repacking to go to Italy. And in the middle of the night, there's this rainstorm, and I mean big time rain. But okay, then we figured by the time we go to be fine. We get up around 6, we go upstairs and we look out and there's water coming in from the terrace, the Merpesit, under the door. And we look out and there's this much water standing on the terrace. And the water's just coming into this beautiful apartment like that. So what do? We call Chaim Cohen. So Chaim Cohen comes, he says, don't worry, you go catch a plane, I'll take care of it. Sure enough, he did. So what we found out later, the drain in the terrace was stopped up and all the water just was gonna come into the apartment. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so on return from Italy, Libby and I arranged to begin Ulpan, and Jeremy had enrolled at Haifa University to take classes in English. We had a large Ulpan class, about 45. One was a Christian Arab, 2 were Americans, that was us, and 42 Russians. If you remember, this was when the big Aliyah came from Russia, and I mean, it was just filled with Russians. And we found the Ulpan quite difficult, much more than we expected. The Russians seemed to find it really easy. They all spoke languages, and learning Hebrew was just for them another language. Another thing that was interesting about the group, one day they took us to the supermarket so you could see what it's like to go buy stuff. The Russian men all went to the vodka. There's this whole thing of, like liquor in grocery stores. Now there is here too, but it never was. And the women all went to the beauty products, lipstick, rouge. In Russia, they didn't have, getting makeup was like impossible. So they wanted to buy sunscreen because, they're fair skinned and they didn't want to get all burned. Okay. So, as I said, I don't know if I said it or not. We bought a beautiful apartment in Baca in February, And it was supposed to be finished in May or June. It was actually finished in November, which was not a problem because we had a year's lease on our apartment. So about May or June one day, we went over to the apartment like, I don't know, all the time to see how the workers were doing, try to help them do it faster. And so we're on Derek Bay Lechem, which is the main street in that area. And our street, Rehov Shimshon, ran into Derek Bay Lechem. We get to the top of Rehov Shimshon, and there are all these police cars, and they have the street blocked off and they won't let us in. So of course, we figured our apartment had been blown up or something. I mean, what could it be that they wouldn't let us in? So nobody spoke English. We finally found someone that spoke English, and they said there'd been a terrorist in the neighborhood and the police weren't letting anyone in. So we waited there about a half hour, and then they let us go down Shimshon, and there were a lot of people in the street, and they were visibly angry. And we ran into a woman there who, she and her husband lived in a little house right behind where our new apartment was going to be, Miriam Steiner. And she not only spoke English, she spoke like 7 or 8 languages. And she told us that a Palestinian, this was before the security wall had been built, that a Palestinian Arab had come into that part of that area and hidden in a school not far from where we live there, where we're going to live there. And he hid in a closet, and his plan was to kill as many children as he could. That's what he came to do. But something happened and it scared him off, and he ran out of the school and came up into our street. The first person he met was a young woman, 19 years old, who had left her home, had breakfast, left home, and she was on her way to her military base. He stabbed her in the chest and killed her immediately. Then a man who was delivering flowers, a 4-year-old man was delivering flowers to an apartment there. That was who he came upon next. He killed him, he stabbed and killed him. There was a man up in an apartment in the upper floor in a building there who saw him stab this delivery man. He was an off-duty policeman. He grabbed his pistol and he went down. And at that time, it's sort of like what's going on in the United States in a way now. The police, there was all this about Palestinians getting killed, and did they have to shoot them? So they had taught the police to be really, really make sure you don't shoot somebody unless you know that your life is in danger. So he warned the man not to stay back. The guy started toward him. He shot him in the leg. The guy fell forward and stabbed him. Anyway, this man's wife saw it, and she ran down. And of course, the terrorist was on the ground. He killed the policeman. And then this Palestinian man was on the ground, and people were coming out of their apartments, and they were ready to lynch him. And I mean, it's a small neighborhood. They knew what had happened. So the police took him and they secreted him in the house, which was behind our apartment, the Steiner's house, till they could get the people off the street. And so the Steiners are there with this terrorist who just killed 3 people in their apartment. And he was there for like 3 or 4 hours till they could get the people off the street. Then they took him off to prison, or wherever they took him. So that was our initiation to the neighborhood. If that makes it sound dangerous, that's the only really bad thing. I told you the worst thing first, so now I want to talk about what we found in Israel and what made it so different from our life in Nashville. I've already told you one thing. First of all, Israel is very small, about half the size of Middle Tennessee. And the population of the whole country is less than 10 million people, about the size of a medium-sized city in the United States. The population is extraordinarily diverse with people and cultures from all over the world. The Israeli culture, there is an Israeli culture, it's what it is to be Israeli, is dominant, but all these other various cultures impinge on it. Russian, American, French, Turkish, Ethiopian, Iraqi, Kurdish, various forms of Sephardi Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when one comes in, as an immigrant, they slowly begin to blend into the dominant Israeli culture, but at the same time, they change that culture to a certain degree. Most people come to Israel, make Aliyah to Israel from countries other than the West, from countries where they were second-class citizens at best. And in Israel, each person feels like an owner and that they know how to do things better than anyone else. Sort of like a synagogue, where every member feels like they own it and they will run it. Israel's topography is also diverse, from the Golan Mountains, where there is snow skiing in the winter, to the Dead Sea area, which is the lowest place on the earth. In the north, there are seasons much like in Nashville. In Jerusalem, it never rains between April and October, never, not one raindrop. So if you want to cook out, or you want to go on a picnic, you want to go on a hike, forget the rain, it's never going to rain. In the south, which is largely desert, it hardly ever rains. It is as hot there most of the year as anywhere in the world. Food in Israel is very important. Because of the many cultures, one can sample food from all over the world. Moussaka from Iraq one night, steak from South Africa the next, French, Italian, Indian, and on and on and on. Most of the food is grown locally and thus always fresh and good. For an American living in Jerusalem, shopping for food is an experience all its own. Things look different. There are fruits and vegetables you have never seen. The person selling you the fruit cannot tell you what it is or explain to you what to do with it. The labeling is all in Hebrew, which presents its own challenges. Food which is imported is very expensive, so most Israelis avoid it whenever possible. And what little labeling in English there is hard to find. So when you're going to buy something, you see this can, this whatever bottle, you don't really know. I mean, liquor, you know. But if beer, you know. But if it's milk, is it 2% milk, 8% milk, 100% fat, whatever, you can't tell. So you just do the best you can. We try to find a grocery where somebody speaks English, to tell you the truth. Okay. Israel has no army draft. When I was in college, we had a draft. If you got a number and you were selected, or you could join if you wanted to go on a special program, which is what I did. But Israel doesn't have a draft because everyone goes in the army. They don't need to draft anybody. When I say everyone, virtually everyone. When we moved there, some people are not accepted. They're too short, they're too tall, for whatever reason, they can't perform in the army. That is the worst thing that could happen to you in Israel. Not to be accepted in the army was it was just the worst. Whereas in the United States, not everybody, a lot of people are running to Canada trying to get away from the draft. There are elite units, often the most dangerous, and ambitious students vie to be accepted in those units, sort of like our kids do for college. And parents, when you know their son, their daughter, whatever is in the army, they're two most famous things. So you say, well, so what do? If I told you I'd have to kill you, that's they always tell you that. And the other one is they're in this elite unit, all the elite units, they're all so proud to tell you what elite unit their son or daughter is in. After Army service, most Israelis take off for a year and travel around the world, backpacking through India, Nepal, South America, Africa, and so forth, for a maturing experience before they apply to university. Consequently, Israelis are older and generally more serious than American students by the time they enter college. Israel is basically surrounded by enemies on most sides: Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. See, I didn't know that in 1968, before Libby went to Israel, I didn't know that all those countries were right around Israel. So you've got all those countries on one side, the Mediterranean Sea on the west, and the Red Sea on the south. Consequently, the only way to travel from Israel is by airline. That's the only way you can get out. You can't get in your car and drive like we go to Kentucky or to Georgia. You can drive to Eilat and you can drive to the Golan, but you can't drive to Syria. You can't drive to Egypt, or you don't want to drive to Iraq. So most Israeli families, even though they're not wealthy, I mean, some are, but most people are not wealthy. Most of them vacation out of the country at least once a year. They take a week or whatever, and they go to some as expensive places they can afford. So over the last 70 years, Israel has moved from being a socialist country in which the government owned all the utilities and major companies to a capitalist country where most industry is in private hands. Much of the credit for moving from a failed economy system to one of the most successful in the world can be credited for this change. You might be surprised to know that Israel exports more tulips than Holland. After the United States, there are more Israeli companies on the NASDAQ than any other country in the world. I had a story I want to tell you about a factory we visited in Werthan, which is down in the desert, that went from being a company 30 years ago owned by the state to one now is in private hands. And this is the most beautiful mechanized operation. The company was going broke, and the state virtually gave it to a philanthropist who hired a lot of new people, modernized the factory, and now it's profitable. It's a beautiful operation, but I'm not going to tell you about it. One might be surprised at the level of education and culture in Israel. When we were remodeling our apartment, we had some classical music playing on the radio one day. When the electrician arrived, he told Libby, "I just love these Bach concertos," which was good for Libby because she didn't know it was Bach. Another time, the UPS driver delivered a package, and when he looked in the apartment, he said, "Oh, you have such beautiful 18th century furniture. My wife and I just love this type of furniture, and I only hope we can fill our apartment with such wonderful pieces one day." So this is the UPS driver and the electrician. Another few things: Israel has no tornadoes, they have no chiggers, they have no moles, they have no squirrels, and they have no chipmunks. And I never found a four-leaf clover there, and I'm really good at finding four-leaf clovers. Israelis are addicted to the news. For the first few years we were there, Israel had only one TV station, which was owned by the state, and the only TV news in English was at 6 p.m. for 15 minutes. So every day at 6 p.m., you can be sure that we were watching the news. That's the only way we could get news. A long distance to call to the United States to call our kids or our parents was $2 a minute. So if you talk, 10 minutes, that was $20. And that was real $20, not $20 today. And as I recall, it was on the radio twice a day, so you'd make sure you could listen into it. There was news in Hebrew every hour. It was on in every shop, every restaurant. You could hear it out on the sidewalk. It was on in the buses every hour. Everybody in the bus is listening to the news as they're going wherever they're going. Unlike unlike here, much of the news was world news, not local. So much was happening around the world, so much happening around the world had an impact on Israel, and everyone had their own interpretation about what each thing meant and how it would affect Israel. Okay.
You're okay. You're okay.
But,
Keep going, Joy.
Okay,
We'll make sure we have time to
Okay,
take questions.
now, let me tell you about finding a shul. The first shul we found was in the Jewish quarter. It was Orthodox. It was really Orthodox. The service wasn't that different from here, but Libby, the women's section was sort of around the corner up in a thing. She couldn't see the bema, she couldn't see anything, and it was a really friendly shul. But, being kind of up there away from everything, she couldn't see what everybody's doing, and that wasn't going to work. But a friend of ours from Virginia, who was visiting, said she heard about a shul in Moshe, which was right across the valley from where we were, and she said it was great. So we went over there, and we met a lot of nice people. It was great. All spoke English. Everybody there spoke English. So we could, be more friendly. And I was going to tell you about some of those people, but I know I don't have time. But we met people who really had an effect on our life and were part of our group in Israel. So one other thing, Libby was invited to join a book club by a woman who belonged to our show, Fran Alpert, and she went. It was taught by Part A's teacher. It was she loved it. She'd never been in a class like that, and she was just raving about it. And so Fran said one day, I'd like you to come over. We're going to move Part A's from this horrible little place we are downtown out to near where you live. So she went over there. And so Fran is showing around, and she said, now we're trying to raise $200,000 to remodel this. You wouldn't want to give, would you? So Libby looks at her and said, I wouldn't want to give. And so Libby says, and they were friendly. She said, Fran, you're not going to raise $200,000 telling people they don't want to give. Of course I'm going to give. So from that, of course we want to give. From that, Libby became chairman of Part A's within 6 months. She was chairman of the board. And she was looking around for a finance chairman, and since I've done a budget or two, she made me finance chairman. And at the time, Part A's had been an agency of part of the Jewish agency, fully funded. They had been turned loose, and they'd given 5 years of funding to find their own funders. They had not really done anything about that, and consequently, it was going out of business. And of course, Libby, having some knowledge about fundraising and organization, got things going, and lo and behold, it survived. And today today, as many of you know, Part A's is building a new building. It's supposed to break ground next month. Libby and I have been on that project for 16 years. We searched for property for 12 years or 10 years, finally found it, and now it's going to be a reality. We're going to be 4.5 stories in a 28-story building. It's going to be one of the iconic buildings in Jerusalem. So just one other quick thing, one experience we had, we got involved in tennis. Someone asked if there was a young woman who was about 14 or 15, great tennis player, if we would like to sponsor her. She was really a precious girl. We decided to do so. It was amazing. Becoming a tennis pro, which is what she wanted to go on the circuit, is amazing. She had 6 coaches, strength coach, tennis coach, a teacher. She had everything. And a lot of people, she had travel with her when she'd go. We went to some of her tournaments, and we sponsored her for about 2 years. It got really, really expensive. She got to be up to about 70 in the world, which was good. She was the women's champion in Israel, and It was a great experience. We met a lot of people that way. Now, so I know my time's running out, so I'm gonna stop. When we do part two, I'll tell you the rest. In 2014, as we were approaching our 80s, we began to talk about the future. What would we do if one of us became disabled, or God forbid, one of us passed away? True, we had many friends in Jerusalem, but they were all about the same age as we were. Our children all lived in the U.S. Could we expect one of them to uproot their life and come take care of us? We decided that while we were still healthy and active, we should move back to Nashville. And that has worked out very well for us. We have no problem getting involved in community activities suitable to our stage in life and our ability to be of service. It has been great being close to our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and siblings. Life is pleasant, plenty active, and not too stressful. Other than COVID, mass shootings, forest fires, and a totally divided country, life is pretty calm.
Sharing with us. So for those of you on Zoom, the bulk of people watching tonight are on Zoom, but we do have a few people here live. So I have some questions myself, but I want to make sure they get their questions answered. I don't know how long everyone can stay. So does anybody here have a question that they want to ask Moshe?
I have a very simple question.
Okay.
What is your favorite Israeli food?
Hummus.
Hummus.
Well, and I've become somewhat of an expert at making chopped salad, Israeli salad with cucumbers. I've got a really good recipe, and I make a lot of it. And in fact, I almost cut my finger off tonight.
Oh no!
Making some for dinner tomorrow. And actually, I was doing quite well. I had it always get it all cut up. And Libby comes on, she starts cutting a potato. I look over at her and there we go. So, anyway, that's those two things.
I have also a very quick question. Did you ever learn Hebrew?
Yes and no. I learned enough to get in trouble. By that I mean, if you would ask a question in Hebrew, the trouble was they're going to answer in Hebrew, unless they realize that your Hebrew is so bad that they know you don't really know Hebrew, which was often the case. So really, if you would try to speak in Hebrew to someone, so you could get some practice, when they realized that you didn't really speak Hebrew well, they would speak in English. So they want to practice their English as much as you want to practice your Hebrew. And so we didn't get a lot of chance to do it. Plus, I'm a Yeki and I have to do things exactly right. And if I can't do it right, so maybe I know 1,000 words, but there are 30,000 words. So when somebody speaks to me and they use all these words I don't know in slang, I can't do it. Then so.
Slang is a whole other language.
Yeah, so the answer is I understand some, Libby understands some, but we cannot speak. That pretty well sums it up.
Other questions from people here?
We're in a crazy real estate market here in Nashville right now. What was it like buying real estate in Israel? It's a different kind of system.
So I give two things. One, we had this incredible agent who took us, the second house we looked at, apartment was the one we bought. And it was perfect for us. The neighborhood was perfect. There were a lot of English speakers in the neighborhood. There was a great shul just up the street. Most of the people in the shul were Israeli and spoke Hebrew, but they understood English and spoke some English. Finding the property, commercial property, was a problem. As I said, we looked at least 10 years for this place, and Libby and I did all the search for that property. We had, I would say, 7, and we wanted to be in South Jerusalem. So we had 6 or 7 different properties that we thought we were going to buy. And each time there was some problem. One we had, and this one that we didn't get to buy was bought soon thereafter. We had this great, big, beautiful piece of property right off Derek Hebron. So we check everything out, it's all good, our lawyers start checking. There's a service station down on Death Road. It turns out it's 75 feet too close to the property to build an educational institution. They're afraid there could be an explosion or something, and so the price was good, everything, and it was huge, and it was just perfect location. We didn't get it. We had another one where it was overlooked the valley there where you was the Jerusalem Valley, and great. This guy promised us everything, and then he lied. He just told us a bunch of lies. And then we had another one on Derek Padron that looked really good. It was too small. I mean, everything, it was zone wrong. It was too expensive, zone wrong. Somebody bought it out from under us. I don't know. We missed maybe 7 properties. And the one we ended up buying was one right next to where Cardex is now, the very next lot. And it worked out great.
Talk to us a little bit about what it was like in the recent Gaza conflict, and you see all the people's reactions to Israel. It's become very divisive even in the Jewish community. Tell us how that feels and what your advice to people about how to talk about Israel is.
It's one thing to see it on TV, and it's a different thing when you're there, as everyone might imagine. We were there for the Gulf War. It started not long, about a year after we got there. There were 39 rocket attacks. Fortunately, and they landed in Tel Aviv, they landed in Cologne, they landed in cities, but nobody was killed from a rocket attack. They landed in empty lot. Buildings were blown up that nobody was in. I mean, it was like one of God's miracles that no one was killed. But I just want to tell you that you had to carry your gas mask with you everywhere you went, no matter where you were. You always had it with you, knowing that at any time you could have an attack and you'd have to wear it. And we had a safe room that was totally sealed off, that we had to go in every time there was an attack. We had a bomb shelter that if there was certain kinds of warnings, you'd have to go into that. And people, while no one was getting killed, those rockets do kill people, and there were Israelis killed. And I honestly don't have a lot of sympathy for people who say that Israel overreacted. There is no overreaction when people are shooting 4,000 rockets at you. And I may be a little conservative on that, but I think anyone who was there or would be there and have these rockets coming at you day and night, you would want your country to defend you, and you want it to stop, and you want your army to stop it. Was that straight enough?
Yes, it was. Thank you. Other questions from the audience here?
So a question, Moshe, as you think ahead of Israel's future and understanding the neighborhood, it can be a rough neighborhood, but yet there's peace accords, Abraham Accords, so there's new opportunities. So how do you look ahead and see the future for Israel on balance?
Yeah. So I've said from the time we went there, or maybe even before, that Israel would never be able to make peace with the Palestinians. It was never going to work out. And I thought it was never going to work out because I didn't think the Palestinians wanted to have peace. And there were Israelis who didn't want another state. But I really thought that Arafat and everyone since him was going to do everything they could to make it not happen. When these accords happened, I was very pleasantly shocked. I think it could have legs if someone doesn't find a way to blow it up. I think Israel really wants it. I think once Israel gets a taste of what it's like to be able to travel to other countries, to have friends in Arab countries, to, live a real life, I think they'll find a way to make peace with the Palestinians. I think this is going to, instead of making peace with the Palestinians leading to peace in the Middle East, I think it's going to be peace in the Middle East leading to peace with the Palestinians. Because I think the Palestinians are going to be forced into doing it, whereas on their own, I don't think they would. That's just, it's just an opinion.
I think Mark Friedman is on the Zoom and wanted to ask the next question. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Leslie. And it's great to see so many friends from Nashville. It's been kind of a rough day down here in South
I know
Florida.
what he was going to ask. He's going to ask me how much we're going to give to the campaign.
I was getting to that, but it really has been a rough day down here in South Florida. And but I wouldn't miss Moshe.
Mark, can you put the question in the chat to Deborah and then she'll feed it to me? Because we can't hear you the way we're filming.
Oh, you can't hear me?
In the meantime, Jessica, go ahead.
Okay.
I was really impressed by the span of your experience, yours and Libby's, going from your Reformed Jewish roots through this whole road of learning, growing your knowledge of Judaism, moving to Israel, moving back. In the 21st century, one of the things that I'm noticing is more polarization of people in general, and in the Jewish community, a sense of, at least in North America, and I think in Israel as well, a siloing of people. What do you feel like your experience would, what would you say to help bridge that divide between different parts of the Jewish community?
Well, of course, if I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be sitting right here. But Libby and I devote most of our philanthropy to Jewish education, whether it's local or in the Part A's, Kiva, JMS, et cetera, et cetera. We think that the more Jewishly knowledgeable people are, the better they'll understand each other. And but I primarily belong to an organization here called Braver Angels, which is an organization which brings conservatives and liberals together to have debates and discussions and workshops, which are very respectful and have an amazing effect on people, learning how to speak to other people in a reasonable voice and listen to other people and learn. And then the organization is growing all over the country, and you can only hope that more people will begin to do that. The country is so divided. It's Jews, but it's really the country is so divided. You're either here or you're there, and the middle is, like been destroyed. So I'm hoping things like Braver Angels will help bring us together, and then education, those are the two things I know. They're not quick fixes, but it's the best I know.
Okay, he actually talked about that, Mark. So the question from Mark.
What, do you want to know how much we're going to give?
No, he didn't want to know about the campaign. He wanted to know if you did Ulpan when you moved there.
I did 3 Ulpans. I went 6 months to the main Ulpan, the city, the community Ulpan. Then I went to a second Ulpan, sort of in our neighborhood. I actually got to what's it called? Mount Plus. Yeah, Olive Plus. Olive Plus. Then I had a private teacher for about 3 years, and then a second one for a couple of years, and then another one till we left, who I went to once a week. It's just, for anyone who's interested, you need to go when you're a child. If you go past 10 years old, you're out of luck. It's hard to learn the language. So I kind of still want, I got one more second. So not long after we moved here, part of our plan was to come to the United States twice a year, to come to Nashville for 2 weeks and California, where our daughters live, for 2 weeks. We did that every year. So maybe the second year we came back, Rabbi Posner called me one day and he said, well, I saw him and he said, look, I want to, would you be willing to get some money? There's a Russian a woman who lives in Haifa and she's in a terrible situation and I want to send her some money. And would you arrange with her to get this money? I'm going to send it to you and you put it in your bank and then get it. So we get there and I don't know, it's maybe a couple of nights we get there, we had this phone call, this woman speaking Russian. Well, I couldn't even say, so Libby knows a little Yiddish or something. I said, maybe she'll know something, you know? I could not understand. I knew it was Russian because I've been in, Opan, but with all these Russians, but what she was saying, I had never a clue. I couldn't even say, wait a minute. I couldn't say, you say, hold on. I'll get somebody to do it. So I put the phone down, I run downstairs and I get Miriam Steiner. She comes up, man, she knows Russian, she knows everything. And so it turned out that this woman had opened an account at Bank Hapoalim, which was our bank. So they made the switch, but it was really disconcerting to have one speaking to you and you don't know even how to say hold on,
Moshe, tell us what your biggest hopes are for Israel going forward.
Peace. Peace. Israel has, it can always do better, but Israel has made it economically. Israel is a really modern country with great food. I'm just going to tell you, it has great food. But they got it, I think they've got that under control. But peace is going to be hard to come by. There's going to be a lot more bloodshed before it happens, unfortunately. But it's just hard to imagine how fantastic it will be if they get peace. I think that's really what everybody wants. It isn't going to come easy because there are those who, even if Fatah decides they want to do it, they're not in control. Hamas is in control. How that, the only way that can stop is someone would get the wealthy Arabs to stop sending them money and to cut back on the money so that they can't afford to do what they're doing. But they're going to keep, there's going to be rocket attacks every few months because it's to their advantage to keep it stirred up. And so it's going to be tough, but it's awesome.
I don't know if you can hear. I live in Chicago, but I wanted to say, as an Israeli, you're both doing the actual shikul, people that have been to Israel, and you have been both into such a difficult experiences, and still you found like the heart of Israel and the stories you're telling now, that's the real shikul. So thank you very much, and I hope you keep telling the stories again and again.
Part two.
Definitely. I think we realized very clearly we need to have a part two. Thank you, Moshe, for joining us tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching either here or on Zoom. And I think we will need to have a part two. So stay tuned and read your e-blast every week. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Moshe.
Maybe I